Okay, we're going to start out with Augustine and the problem of evil. A couple things I'm going to do in here. I'm going to tell you about Augustine and go through the problem of evil, which will get us into a discussion by Hannah Arendt and Philip Haley. And it will also give you a good idea of what Epicurus was doing and what other philosophers are doing. In here, I'm going to do a bit of logic and present a bit of logic so that you understand what I'm looking for in your papers. I think that's all that needs to be said on that part. So let's move into Augustine. In America, we're going to talk about evil. Generally, we like to talk about syndromes and maladies, and you see that in the video by Elstein. But we don't want to talk about evil. For example, when we talk about Andrea Yates, immediately we start talking about postpartum depression. Susan Smith was the woman who drowned her 2 children in the car and said that they were kidnapped by a black man. And actually, she had drowned them herself because her boyfriend or new husband didn't like the children. There was also that case of the child molester in Florida. John Abender Cooey was a 46-year-old sex offender registered with the state of Florida. He was charged with capital murder, sexual battery, and assault on 9-year-old Jessica Lunsford, who was kidnapped from her home in February 24, 2005. Cooey was assisted in evading police by family members with whom he shared a house, and indications are that they may have helped him in committing the crime or covering it up. An autopsy determined Lunsford was buried alive, still clutching a stuffed blue dolphin that her father had given her. And so a lot of times we just don't even want to think about such a horrible thing. And so we will say it's not evil, it's a sickness, and everything gets reduced. There's a big problem with just simply saying that it's a sickness. If it were simply a sickness, we would be able to cure that in some way with medication or something. Or the worst case scenario is that because it is physical, it is predetermined, there would be no way that we could punish people for this because it's already been set in motion by their genes or whatever it might be that would simply lead them to do these types of things. It's not a sincere discussion, and what we want to do is, as philosophers, we want to look and say, gosh, it just simply can't be sickness. There's a lot of problems with just saying it's simply a sickness. So we need to really discuss this at length, and with such a complex problem, we want to do it justice. So we do have a big problem with the word evil. J.K. Rowling, who wrote Harry Potter, I actually put this in the next one, has taken the time to investigate this phenomenon that seems to elude us in sense and prevention. This series is exactly what is necessary and enlightening in this complex discussion of evil, especially in the generation and time that we live in. Augustine, like Rowling, thinks that evil is more than sickness and is an issue of the free will. Rowling sets that up in Harry Potter as well. A lot of things that she talks about are courage in spite of what's going on. And interestingly, the way that she presents courage has nothing to do with our superheroes or villains that we see on TV, but rather they are these very courageous people who think of courage and stepping back and not using force and just kind of evaluating situations and what their place is in that. So we'll go with that in mind. The traditional problem of evil was first discussed by the Greek philosopher Epicurus. Since then, many philosophers and theologians have wrestled with the problem. The problem is seen by philosophers as the greatest evidence against God's existence. Since God is omnipotent, and this is the argument that Epicurus sets up, he would create a world with free agents who always freely choose to do the right thing. Not puppets, but truly free agents would choose the good each time. Also, God would create a world in which no natural evils would exist either. And as an omnibenevolent, he would prefer a flawless world to the one with evil. And this is kind of his idea and where he's going to set up his argument. The types of evil that he's considering and thinking about would be moral evil, ethical evil, the things that humans do to one another. Natural evil, which would be disasters, earthquakes, floods, things that are completely out of human control. The interesting thing about our what we call natural disasters, if you think about all the earthquakes that we have and you plot out the truly great cities in the world, you'll find that all the great cities in the world are all on a fault line. People love to make their home near floodplains and on floodplains. In fact, in Wisconsin, there was a man-made island that they put houses on, and as soon as the waters rose and the floods came, the houses were gone. New Orleans is actually the Mississippi has been routed to go through New Orleans, but eventually the Mississippi will move away from New Orleans. And in 2004, my husband's geology teacher said, don't bet on New Orleans. And it was very interesting afterward. And the biggest problem, he said, is floods and hurricanes. And so there you have it. Physical evil, which is bodily pain and or mental anguish, grief, war. Metaphysical evil, and this is perhaps on par with privation, meaning deprivation. The goods that we should have, but that have been taken or never given, deformities, injustice, those all fall into that category. So here's a problem. There are three ways to define God. God is omnipotent, he's all-powerful, he's omniscient, he's all-knowing, and he's perfectly good, but still evil exists, and this is a big problem. So Augustine is going to grapple with evil, and the way it can be phrased is several ways, but one approach addresses the origin of evil, prompting the syllogism, a series of statements that form a reasoned argument. God created all things, evil is a thing, therefore God created evil. If the first two premises are true, the conclusion is inescapable. So God created all things, evil is a thing, God created evil. But then we go back and we see, gosh, I have God is omnipotent, he's omniscient, and he's perfectly good, and evil, wow, is here. This doesn't seem like something that would go along with someone that is perfectly good and someone that is perfectly powerful, that can't deal with those two things. So in order to tackle the problem, he's going to ask the question, what is evil? We have to get to that origin. The argument above depends on the idea that evil is a thing. And we'll go back to the second premises. Evil is a thing. God created all things. Evil is a thing. But what if evil is not a thing in that sense? Then evil did not need creating. So this is going to take you into another realm here. If so, our search for the source of evil will certainly take us in another direction. So first things first, do we have any convincing evidence that a good God exists? And that's a good question. If independent evidence leads us to conclude that God exists and is good, then he would be incapable of creating evil, and something else then must be its source. And Augustine is going to go with the idea that there is a God and that he is a good God. And Descartes went a long ways to try and prove that as well. And I don't have a problem with you saying that there isn't a God, but in the same way, you're going to have to say, well, what is there? Why is there evil in the world? If it's simply a physical world, why is it there? And you're going to still come up against the same problems. And so this is one way on one side, and the theist side, to explain why there is evil. And then on the physicalist side, you're going to have to prove that as well. And I think some of you came into the class thinking that philosophy is simply your interpretation and your opinion. It's certainly not. These things have to be proven. You can have your opinion, but you must prove it. So there are some ways to look at the problem. If Augustine's approach is fair, it prompts a pair of syllogisms. Syllogisms are just, it's a form, a valid form to put your argument in. And it leads to, the two of them lead to a different conclusion. First, all things that God created are good. Evil is not good. Therefore, evil was not created by God. Second, God created everything. God did not create evil. Therefore, evil is not a thing. And this is clever on his part. Plotinus is the first one to put this out there, but Augustine picks up on it. And Plotinus is a Neoplatonist, which means he follows Plato. And he brings up this same idea. And Augustine says, gosh, if you were only to change a couple things in Plotinus, he would most certainly be a Christian. But the key to success, and I'll stop here and go on with number two, with part two. The key to success is the truthfulness of the two premises. If Augustine can offer evidence through natural theology that God exists as creator and also that God is good, making everything he created also good, then the conclusion, evil is not a thing, automatically follows. And this is difficult work. And he has a long ways to go in here. So we'll stop here and we'll start up with part two.